Hello. That was a section from my piece Polizina, which is a 5-movement, 20-minute piece for female choir and dancers, with wind and brass octet. It tells the story of the Princess of Troy after the end of the siege of Troy. The myth is, in a sense, a Trojan version of Iphigenia. According to Euripides, the ghost of Achilles appears before the Greek leaders and reveals that the wind will only rise to blow the ships back home if the gods are appeased by the sacrifice of Polizina, the youngest and sole surviving daughter of King Priam. If the mortals are to have their way, she must be slaughtered at the foot of Achilles' grave. Again, like the Iphigenia myth, the story is metaphysical in a way that has continuing relevance. It represents a subservience experienced by the ancients to the spirit world, the realm of the gods and the dead, and, as I've described by way of the Iphigenia myth, today it represents a similar subservience felt by the orthodox conventions of civilization to science and the laws of nature. But on the other hand, as I discussed in episode 45, the modern world is a pluralist one. There's a plethora of different metaphysical theories, whether primarily ontological, deontic or normative, and many of these approaches assert some form of postmodernist or ethnographic relativism, allowing for their own local position in a pluralist world. Despite the fact that the Weimar identity thesis contributed both to the continuing prevalence of idealism in the 19th century and anti-realist pluralism in the 20th century, a situation that hasn't changed today, I should emphasise that German idealism, from which it was founded, is a monist position. As I described in episode 12, the dualist position of Descartes, outlining a cosmos of two substances, was challenged by Fichte's subjective idealism, which posited the cosmos was constituted only by one substance, of mind. This position was rejected by Goethe and Schelling, but their reintroduction of nature into metaphysical theory insisted mind and nature were analogous, two sides of the same coin. However, there's an apparent contradiction here, whereby the Weimar identity thesis is a quasi-monist position acting to support pluralism, and I need to consider this more carefully. Given the Weimar tradition, like that of monism and pluralism, is not a scientific tradition but a metaphysical one, it's reasonable to address this apparent contradiction by way of metaphysical methodology, and the most powerful conceptual context for handling these kinds of issues is, as I've discussed previously, modal semantics. Throughout this inquiry, I have looked at the debate between those who posit the existence of a mind-independent reality, the realists, and those who posit a reluctance to afford ontological commitment to any so-called reality, the idealists or anti-realists. It's worth emphasising that any discussion pertaining to what exists and what doesn't leaves a great deal out. It deals only with the present. Everything of the past and the future, as these matters are conceived by humans, are not considered as real, as comprising of extant entities by either realists or anti-realists. If I say my camera is operating right now, then I'm referring to an actual physical state in the world. If I say my camera was operating when I filmed another episode last week, then I may have evidence to support this claim, the recorded video, but the fact that my camera was operating doesn't report an actual physical state in the world as it exists now. The possible world semantics of modality, as developed by Saul Kripke and many others, which I introduced in episode 38, provides a tool for analysing these kinds of issues. In the case of past and future, the entities and structures involved can be said to possess a temporal modality. Simplistically, I might propose the present as the actual world, W1, and a particular definition of the past or the future as a possible world, W2. Thereafter, to explain the difference between the monism and pluralism posited by the Weimar identity thesis, I might propose that the plurality of worlds is represented by W1, W2, W3 and so on to Wn. This encompasses a hermeneutic approach, which would assign a different world for each and every person alive today, and perhaps a different world for every split second of their lives. I might then propose that the monism of worlds is represented by the single set of all of these possible worlds included together. I should add a caveat that not everybody agrees with this approach. Many of those involved in the continental tradition of philosophy would argue that all metaphysics theories, including that of possible world semantics, are derived from normative paradigms. No analytical tool should be afforded a neutral position. the exemption from epistemics. Analytics is itself a normative claim. This is a hierarchical debate between different types of knowledge. Is metaphysical analytics reducible to its cultural context? I mean reducible in the broadest of terms. Or is culture reducible to metaphysics? This is the idealist debate all over again. On the one side there's the Kantian stance whereby all knowledge is subservient to reason, and on the other side the Hegelian stance whereby reason is subject to historical context. Similarly, if I substitute metaphysical reality for reason, then it's the Plato versus Aristotle debate all over again. Despite these caveats, I'm going to argue that possible worlds semantics is a powerful tool because it can accommodate both or all positions simultaneously. It can accommodate any one world taken as actual, defining its ontological commitment to other worlds. There is one possible world where realism is actual, and another world where anti-realism is actual. One possible world where the Kantian stance is given truth value, and another world where the Hegelian stance is given truth value, and so forth. It can accommodate the pluralism of worlds and the modal state of necessity encompassing the pluralism of worlds. I'm going to continue using this tool extensively in the last few chapters of my inquiry to examine the main question that's driven a substantial part of this inquiry. What does the Weimar identity thesis mean to the still unresolved mind-body problem in the world today? To continue the inquiry, I've come to the Ilm Park Rock. I don't know what the inscription means, and nobody's been able to tell me. Perhaps it's lost to the tides of history. Nevertheless, it seems an appropriate location to consider what might be called the hard rock problem of mind and nature. In a world of physical matter and hard rock and heavy metal, how can we account for consciousness? Uriah Kriegel said that the value of consciousness can be appreciated from a number of perspectives. One concerns moral value. It's natural to hold that even if much of our mental life is unconscious, consciousness is what makes our life interesting, indeed, what makes it valuable. If all our mental life were unconscious, so that we were effective zombies, life would be essentially pointless. There seems to be no intrinsic difference between death and complete and irreversible loss of consciousness. In both cases, we're gone. Both positions have had their respective difficulties.
Difficult.
Dissatisfaction with materialism has laid primarily in the implication that complete scientific knowledge should or would reveal complete knowledge as regards the mental life.
In the former, the mental
Stolja said that if, according to modern scientific orthodoxy, mental states are dependent upon physical states, the problem for materialism is that it's on the face of it incomplete, for it seems to leave out properties constitutive of consciousness. Kriegel added, if we really knew everything there is to know about this person's brain, and body and environment, and these facts necessitated the facts about her mind, then we should be able to figure out what the facts about her mind are. And yet this does not seem to be the case. We can imagine knowing everything about someone's physical existence without knowing much, or anything, about his or her mental life, or even whether she has any. On the other side, it's important to recognise that dualism, as defined by the Descartes tradition, is a clumsy and awkward theory. It posits that most properties are a part of the material world, but just certain properties are not. It entails leftover baggage, nomological danglers. Despite Chalmers' speculations, which I looked at in the last episode, of collapsing wave functions revealing a gap in supposedly causally closed physics, dissatisfaction with dualism has centred around the problem of epiphenomenalism. Setting the mind outside the physical world, according to Kriegel, leads to the result that the mind is causally inert, entirely unable to affect the world outside it. I've looked at many of the historical strands over the past 200 years that have been influenced by the Weimar identity thesis, from phenomenology to critical theory, and from ordinary language to hermeneutics. But I intend to argue that the most compelling of recent theories engaging with these unresolved metaphysical dilemmas, particularly pertaining to the relationship between mind and matter, is Russellian monism. I'm going to dedicate the entirety of episode 49 to a justification of the theory, but for now I'll introduce matters by saying it starts with the supposition that even if physics is successful in sorting out quantum mechanics and revealing the causal framework of the world, the fundamental essence of the world possesses properties that cannot be explained by physics. This fundamental essence underpins far more than just a naturalist paradigm. It also underpins a metaphysical realm, including the notion of analogies between mind and nature, between mental states and consciousness on the one hand, and physical states on the other. If I posit that Russellian monism is derivative and the child of our time of the Weimar identity thesis, then I must add immediately that the methodology used to justify each is quite different. German idealism asserted their verbose speculations with recourse to others' verbose speculations. In contrast, Russellian monism is asserted analytically, with recourse to many of the strategies I've introduced in these episodes. After all, if a theory pertaining to metaphysics cannot answer to the many objections made to other metaphysical theories, and if it can't answer to matters of empiricism, nomology, epistemology, and even to the aesthetic and ethical, then it will be quickly replaced with a new theory. Furthermore, while the Weimar identity thesis posits phenomenal experience as evidence of the analogous state of mind and nature, whereby it's possible to perceive certain qualities such as teleology in both mental and natural terms, Russellian monism downplays this aspect. It's interested in the causes of phenomenal experience of consciousness only, not what the experience of consciousness might reveal in itself of this causality. As I've said before, it's focused on the metaphysics and avoids the epistemology. Again, I must emphasise that Russellian monism is a metaphysical theory, not a scientific theory. There's no empirical evidence thus far for any fundamental essence unifying mind and nature as proposed by the theory. But metaphysics opens a possibility of reaching beyond empiricism and addressing matters of conceivability. It is true that I'm filming this episode near the Ilm Park Rock. The film and my own experience are evidence of this truth. But I can conceive a situation whereby, instead, I might have filmed at the Weimar Schloss or the Schiller residence. The fact that I might have filmed elsewhere is not an empirical one. I cannot prove it with evidence. It's merely hypothetical. Possible world semantics enables descriptions of situations that are not actual, not extant, whether the ontological commitment is considered real or anti-real, but that are still conceivable. Accordingly, it encompasses the principle of the conceivability argument, which is important to a metaphysical count of the hard rock problem. The conceivability argument posits that for any definition of the world, it's possible to conceive something other. If the world is taken to be entirely physical, as is claimed by natural science, which has defined itself as the science of the physical, then it's conceivable for the world to exist in a way whereby it's not physical. If mental states are taken to be dependent upon physical states, as argued by material identity theory, then it's possible to conceive a world where mental states are not dependent upon physical states. Extending this principle to the connection between mind and nature, Stolle outlined the difference between mind and nature in terms of alethic modality. The relation between experiential and physical properties is not metaphysically necessary, but is only naturally necessary, i.e. necessary given the way the laws of nature in fact are. Following on from this and applying possible world semantics to the conclusions proposed by functionalism, whereby mind is a function and need not necessarily be reducible to a brain, the conceivability argument posits that there's a possible world whereby mind is not reducible to a brain. It rejects the argument that it's necessarily the case that mental states are dependent upon physical states on metaphysical grounds. It asserts that mind-brain supervenience is a mere contingency. If the connection between mind and nature is not a necessary one in metaphysical terms, and if the world is taken to comprise of entities beyond the natural, such as modal entities, then there must be something else that unites the full set of metaphysically possible worlds, which is a fundamental essence described by Russellian monism. Before I finish this episode, I should emphasise that Russellian monism doesn't just leave it at that, with a great gulf dividing the metaphysical and the nomological. Stolle said that Russellian monism agrees that materialism, at least of the usual sort, is defeated by the conceivability argument, but holds out the hope for some alternative account that preserves its spirit and structure and so avoids the inelegance of dualism. In episode 49, I'll look at David Chalmers' justification of the coherency of this argument, and I'll also dwell further on the claim that Russellian monism is a direct lineal descendant of the Weimar identity thesis. But before that, I need to explore possible world semantics in greater depth, which I'll do in the next episode. As for now, I'll stick with representing the entire matter in musical terms. Here's another section from my piece, Polizina. Thanks for listening.